This man's name is Anatoly Kuznetsov. He is 40 years old, one of the Soviet Union's leading novelists. On July 30th of this year, Anatoly Kuznetsov, on a trip to England, escaped from his Russian guard and defected. In the lining of his coat, he had sewn this film, copies of the original manuscripts of his novels.
That there is the whole of my life. These are my real books, not the ones as they are known to the reader.
This is the story of a man who got away. And there are men in this building who would like nothing better than to get their hands on it. This is the Soviet embassy in London. Anatoly Kuznetsov will have nothing to do with it. Kuznetsov spent his adult life in that schizophrenic twilight zone, trying to be both an honest novelist and a Soviet citizen. His best-known work in the West is the novel Babi Yar, an account of the Nazi massacres in the Ukraine in 1942. Kuznetsov's story is made of the stuff of classic spy fiction, but it is brutally true. It involves the Soviet secret police, the KGB, a shabby hotel in the West End of London, the Apollo, a favorite place for the Soviet embassy to put up visiting delegations, and sex, too, among the seedy strip clubs of Soho. It is a story of escape and betrayal. Like many good thrillers, a newspaper man is involved. The London Daily Telegraph's Soviet affairs editor, David Floyd, the man in the middle. Someone had given Kuznetsov Floyd's name. Kuznetsov now lives in hiding. He prefers to be called by his first name, Anatoly. Kuznetsov, he says, was the man who wrote what he was told to write, and he wants to forget him. But he emerged from hiding to tell his remarkable, sometimes sickening story of life in the Soviet Union. The interpreter is David Floyd, the man who took Kuznetsov in from the cold. I know that the Soviet embassy has been very anxious to talk to you, and you have flatly refused to do so, even in the presence of British Foreign Office people.
Но я их боюсь. Даже в присутствии официальных лиц. Даже на расстоянии я их боюсь.
I am afraid of them. Even in the presence of British officials and even at a distance, I'm afraid of them.
This is a CBS News special, The Ordeal of Anatoly Kuznetsov, with CBS News correspondent Morley Safer. Now, The Ordeal of Anatoly Kuznetsov, with CBS News correspondent Morley Safer.
Anatoly Kuznetsov, when did you decide to leave the Soviet Union?
Анатолий Кузнецов, вы когда решились уехать из Советского Союза?
Решение уехать было у меня.
The decision to leave I took on the morning of the 21st of August last year.
That was when Soviet troops went into Czechoslovakia. But there have been many things in the past 20 years and more equally horrible. What was so special about Czechoslovakia?
Ну, это, вероятно, для меня лично было последней каплей в чаше.
Well, probably for me personally, that was the last drop.
После этого у меня как-то не осталось веры и надежды.
After that, I really didn't have any faith left or any hope.
All right, there you are, a Soviet citizen who decides to leave Russia. What do you do?
Это очень трудно выехать из Советского Союза.
Because it's very difficult to leave the Soviet Union.
Очень мало людей.
Very few people get to travel outside the Soviet Union.
Прежде всего, если на вас есть в полиции досье,
First of all, if there is a dossier on you with the police,
то вас не выпустят.
well, then you won't get out anyway.
Вы должны быть очень на работе, хорошую
You've got
репутацию.
to have a very good reputation at work.
Должны много-много раз заявить.
You've got to have made frequent statements about your political loyalty, your love for the party and the government. You must be psychologically and nervously in good form, fit. If you've consulted a doctor, and especially if you've consulted a psychiatrist, you would never be let out. And then for 5 or 6 months, you fill in a mess of different forms. You particularly have to put down what people near to you, close to you, you leave behind in Russia. A bachelor has very little hope of getting out. A man with a family has better chances. Then he has children left behind and people related to him. Then you have to go through all sorts of conversations, interviews with people. Sometimes they will tell you to follow the activities of the people who go with you, because they very seldom let you out alone. You have to go out in a group. On my case, they attached a special personal agent to me. I had no permission to leave. I once made a journey in 1961 to France. And since then, for 8 years, they wouldn't let me out. There were foreign publishing houses invited me out. I was invited to Paris by a French publishing firm at their expense, for their money. And it looked as though they were going to let me out. But then the secret police got in the way and I wasn't released. Then I was invited to New York by the Dial Press publishers. They wrote a long letter. They promised to put up $5,000. And then once again, at the very last moment, they wouldn't let me out. So then I decided to get out at any price. I got ready to try and swim out underwater. Because it's very difficult, there's tremendous guard on the frontier everywhere. I took a lot of chances and I was very scared. I trained myself to do this. I trained myself to swim underwater. I can now, for example, swim for 15 hours underwater. Because what I had to do was swim under the water and do it in one night. And only if there were bad weather. I just got a letter from another Russian who actually did manage to do it by swimming. He got out to Turkey in the end. There he met up with a Soviet frontier guard who had also got out to Turkey. And the frontier guard explained to him it was only a miracle that he had got out at all. Lots of people try, but they all get caught. The Russian authorities don't only have radar equipment on the surface, which are good enough even to detect a child's ball floating on the surface. But they also have hydro radar locators underneath the water. And they would have caught me. They would have detected me.
So you decided against swimming out, and you made one more attempt to come out legally.
I made my third effort to get out legally, so that I decided to try to fit in with what the secret police wanted. I knew that if I didn't let me out that time, then I knew I would never get out. Well, I succeeded, but at a very considerable price.
What was that price?
As I said, I had to demonstrate in some way my loyalty. Not only my loyalty, but my anxiety, my willingness to work with the secret police. They persecuted me for 8 years. They demanded that I should inform upon my friends who were writers. Yevtushenko, Aksionov. These are all my friends. I refused. So then they developed a great dossier on me. They got people to attach themselves to me, pretending to be friends. They got women to try to become my mistresses. A lot of these people told me what was happening and warned me about it. My telephone was bugged, my letters were opened. I think there were microphones in my rooms. They knew absolutely everything about me. I had 2 copies of the magazine America. And suddenly some completely unknown person rang me up and said, "Why on earth do you keep those foreign magazines in your home?" It's already written down in your dossier. So then, in desperation, I decided to show them that I had changed my ways, that I would improve, would behave differently. What you have to do, I said to myself, is to just pretend to yourself, believe that this is the Gestapo. I must escape from the concentration camp. What do they want? In order that they should believe me. That I should inform on my own friends. That would be fine. Let them have their informer. I composed what was probably the most striking, the finest piece of writing in my life. I said that these writers, Yevtushenko, Aksionov, and a group of others, right down to some actors in the comedy theater, were getting ready to produce and publish a frightful underground magazine. That they've got an underground print shop, that they're gathering manuscripts together and money for the job. Oh, how the secret police were pleased with this. This was a pure fiction. I even thought I might put in that they were actually planning to blow up the Kremlin, but then I thought that they'd see through that. But it didn't matter. They have no sense of humor. They took it all seriously.
Then what did you do?
Решил убедительное заявление написать. У нас сейчас там в России идет...
I decided to write a really persuasive application. There's a terrific campaign now going on at the moment, preparing for the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth. If you want to do something in this connection, then everything is possible. I said I wanted to write a novel about Lenin and how he created the Communist Party in London. And I would just have to go and visit all the places where he'd been in London.
You
created a kind of phony project in a way.
And I made it it was a very detailed plan too. So then they started to work with me and said that they'd let me go to England. And that maybe they would give me some secret task to perform, secret mission. That just before I left Russia, I should telephone and I would probably get my secret instructions. Do you know, I took a chance and I didn't bother to ring up.
Anatoly, do you feel any guilt about what you wrote and reported about Yevtushenko and the others?
Of course I do. It's by no means excluded that they may have had difficulties. I wrote about it immediately as soon as I was here in the Daily Telegraph. So that the KGB over there should know what I'd done.
That it was a false project?
Yes, of course. But this is such an ordinary, everyday thing with them that this isn't going to surprise anybody.
Yet you know that Yevtushenko was once greatly admired in the West, and many of his poems were against the Soviet system. So perhaps there was some grains of truth in what you reported to the KGB.
No, of course not. He has no plans to start an underground print shop.
So there you are on a plane with your shadow, and you arrive in London. Then what do you do? Well, we found a room in a hotel, which was booked for us either by the Soviet embassy or people who were very close to the embassy. I don't have the right to choose a hotel myself. And then you have a plan.
We always, when we come on these trips, have several sheets of paper containing the program of what we are to do, and a copy of this remains behind in Russia.
What I meant was a plan to evade the authorities.
Well, that's a different question, of course.
Tell me about that.
Well, my first problem was to get a few hours of freedom when my agent, my watchdog, wasn't with me. I didn't manage to get that for 4 days. He never took his eyes off me.
You must have been a desperate man.
No. I studied him pretty carefully. I knew his weaknesses.
What were they?
We went walking around London. And he, like any young man, he was simply amazed at the beautiful women, the pretty girls, the short skirts, the mini skirts. I noticed the effect this had on him, and I worked on him with a view to suggested he should visit the striptease shows. You had to become a member, and he wrote himself in as a Yugoslav citizen. In Russia, we are strictly forbidden to visit anything like striptease, or get mixed up with women. We have to sign a paper saying that we shan't do this. In this way, both of us, both I and my watchdog, became criminals. So this introduced a certain amount of confidence between the two of us. We agreed with each other not to tell on each other. And when he told me that in the evening he absolutely had to meet certain people, that I should have to sit in the hotel.
Я лучше пойду в другой стриптиз, посмотрю, как там. Если там интересно, то мы туда снова пойдем.
Then I said, much better if I were to go and have a look at another striptease, and if it looks all right, then we can both go along there another time.
Он поколебался и согласился.
He hesitated for a moment, and then he agreed. And I said, if I don't come back for rather a long time, he shouldn't worry.
И ушел. Ушел я в телефонном автомате.
And he went off, and, well, I went off to a telephone kiosk, telephone booth.
Я звонил в Daily Telegraph.
I telephoned the Daily Telegraph,
Искал Дэвида Флойда, который говорит.
tried to get in touch with David Floyd, who speaks Russian.
Не удалось найти.
I managed to get hold of him, and we met.
What did you say to him?
Я сказал Дэвиду Флойду, что я хочу остаться в Лондоне, чтобы он помог мне, потому что я не знаю языка.
I told him I wanted to stay in London, asked him to help me because I didn't know English,
Спрятаться от моего агента и
that I wanted to hide away from my watchdog, my KGB man.
это очень опасный шаг.
This was a very dangerous step to take.
Их агенты везде по всему миру.
They've got their agents all over the place, all over the world.
Сами мне еще в России с довольным смехом рассказывали, что у них агенты таких невероятных.
They used to tell me with a smile that they had agents in all parts of the world, in the most incredible places,
В таких невероятных местах, что и вообразить
places you
невозможно.
just couldn't imagine.
Допустим, я так могу предположить, допустим, я обращусь в полицию, а начальник этой полиции советский агент.
They suggested that I might perhaps go to a police chief, and this police chief might in fact be a Soviet agent. This was just theoretically.
Человека, в котором я могу быть
So I
уверен.
looked for somebody of whom I could be quite certain.
Он сразу понял, в чем дело, и очень хорошо мне помог.
He quickly understood what was the matter, and he helped me, and I shall be grateful to him for the rest of my life.
You know that some Western writers, the American novelist William Styron, have described what you have done as despicable, both in informing and, in fact, in leaving the Soviet Union.
Если мистер Стайрон так считает,
If Mr. Styron thinks that way, well, I'm happy to offer him my flat in Tula. Let him go and try it.
они до сих пор не понимают, что такое Советский Союз.
They still don't understand just what the Soviet Union is.
Если бы перед Томасом Манном или Бертольдом Брехтом стояла дилемма либо остаться у Гитлера, либо эмигрировать, что бы тогда сказал Сталин?
If Thomas Mann or Bertolt Brecht had been faced with the dilemma of leaving Germany or living under Hitler, what would they have said then?
Они ведь уехали из Германии.
After they left Germany, after all.
А если бы им пришлось просто спасаться
If
любой ценой перед гестапо,
they had to save themselves at any price to get away from the Gestapo.
впрочем, этот вопрос я и сам решить не могу.
In any case, this is a question which I myself can't decide.
Я хочу сам себя спрашиваю, что сказали бы люди, если бы узнали, что Достоевский, например, написал, ну пусть ложный, но донос на своих приятелей.
I ask myself, after all, what would people say if they learned, say, that, Dostoevsky, say, had written and informed, even falsely, but had informed on his friends.
Я не знаю, что тут отвечать. Знаю только одно, что ни Достоевский, ни Толстой, ни другие великие русские писатели не жили в России, в советской.
I don't know what to answer. I can only say that neither Dostoevsky, nor Tolstoy, nor Turgenev, none of them lived in Soviet Russia.
Yet Daniel, Sinyavsky, and Pasternak did live in the Soviet Union.
Значит, вы предлагаете русскому писателю только потому, что он русский, садиться в концлагерь.
So you would be advising a Russian writer simply because he's Russian to live in a concentration camp.
У меня маленькая надежда, что не сидя в концлагере.
I have a small hope that not living in a concentration camp, I may be able to say more. I don't know.
What were your feelings as a Soviet writer during the trials of Daniel and Sinyavsky?
Ужас.
Horror.
Did you want to speak out for them?
У меня не хватало мужества на это.
I didn't have the courage to do that.
And where would you be today if you had spoken out?
Если бы я это активно делал, я был бы рядом с ними.
If I'd done it really actively, I should be alongside them now.
Или бы просто меня не публиковали, я бы не смог выехать.
Or they would simply not have published me, or I shouldn't have been able to come out of the country.
The Soviet authorities said you left for the most tawdry of reasons, that you left a pregnant mistress behind.
Я об этом узнал из советской печати.
Well, I learned about this from the Soviet press.
Я пока не знаю, в чем дело.
I don't yet know what they're talking about.
Борис Полевой об этом написал. Видимо, ему больше известно об этой женщине, чем мне.
It was Boris Polyevoy who wrote about this, and apparently he knows more about this woman than I do.
You know, Anatoly, human nature is a very funny thing. No one really likes a turncoat. How do you feel about that?
Что же мне делать? И что я обречен быть всегда конформистом, трусом? Что же мне делать?
So what do I have to do? Am I condemned to remain always a coward, a conformist? What can I do?
Я родился в России, я родился
I
в
was
России.
born in Russia.
Жил там
I was
40
born in
лет.
Russia. I lived there 40 years, and I know no other life.
И вдруг наступил момент, когда я больше так жить не могу.
And the moment came when I could no longer live that way.
Что вы мне посоветуете делать?
What do you advise me to do?
Самоубийство?
Commit suicide?
Я об этом думал.
I thought about that.
The ordeal of Anatoly Kuznetsov will continue in a moment.